Today in front of the camera, we have the Rado Goldenhorse 1957 limited edition. This was released in January of 2020 and has really kind of been an unheralded watch that's flown under the radar. Some of you guys may not even be familiar with it, but I'm happy to give it some screen time here. I think this is very strong. I have an affinity for retro designs. I have an affinity for great detail work, nice bracelets. So this one is exciting for me. And it's exciting for a couple reasons. About a month ago, I got an email from Rado who said, hey, we noticed your Captain Cook video last year. We think you did a good job. We think you did a fair review. Would you like to feature more product from us? And really, that's exciting to be contacted from a Swatch Group brand that I really respect, and to be able to borrow watches to present, I'm really excited, guys. So I'll try to keep it even-keeled. I know I'm high on this watch. I'm positive on this piece, but we will touch on the negative elements to give this a fair shake. So let's start with the dimensions and the detail work. This measures in at about 36.6 millimeters according to my digital calipers, and it plays bigger. It plays more substantial. It's not diminutive on wrist. If you guys are familiar with the SARB 33 from Seiko, or perhaps the Seiko Alpinist, or the Datejust 36 from Rolex, it feels more like those other models that play more like a 38 or a 38.5 millimeter. And my wrists are 7.25 inches in circumference, so a little bit on the larger size. And as you guys can see, this is very proportional. It doesn't look too small, it doesn't feel too small, but it's comfortable at the same time. 44.6 millimeters lug to lug, 11 in overall height, but a lot of that is down to the box sapphire crystal that carries anti-reflective treatment. If you were to subtract the crystal height, the overall case height goes down to 8.5 millimeters. So it's nice and thin, but it doesn't wear too small, if that makes sense. And that is one of the things that I enjoy about this. 20 millimeter lug width, tapering down to 16 millimeters width at the clasp. And you guys can see this is the beads of rice or the grains of rice bracelet that is one of the most comfortable and most fun bracelet designs out there. And it's a design that Rado used a lot in the 1960s and 1970s, so it's nice to see here on this modern interpretation of the Goldenhorse, which originally came out in 1957. And I will say, if you own a Captain Cook, it's very similar to the Captain Cook in the fact that they both carry the grains of rice and they both have very dramatic domed dials that are among the stars of the show for each respective model. So it's kind of fun. If you were to have a Captain Cook and a Goldenhorse, you would have very similar watches in terms of design details, but very different in terms of styles, sport watch styles. And so that would create some nice symmetry and juxtaposition in a watch collection. Let's talk about the dial here. We have a few things going on. One, we have a dramatic dome. You guys can see how highly domed that is around the edge. These appliques, these polished applied markers are set on that dome, and that looks good. The color around the edge is black. The color around the center or the hand stack is a deep, vibrant blue. So there's a fume color application. It's domed. There's light play. It almost has a lacquered look that is enhanced by the shape of this box sapphire crystal and the high polished chapter ring around the edge of the dial. So there's a lot going on visually, but it's also very simple at the same time. We don't have minute indexing. So that also kind of, I don't know, in my opinion, makes the dial feel a little bit less cluttered and a little bit larger visually. Now, if we look north to south, we can see a nice faceted applique, high polish. Below that at the 12 o'clock position, you guys can see the rotating anchor logo with some color. We have a textured red background. And depending on where the watch is, like if you're wearing this day to day, you look down at your wrist, you'll see that anchor. And then if you move your wrist, that anchor will move. It rotates within that logo. And that's really fun. That's a fun detail. So it's nice to see that change throughout the day. And that will be a design detail of every automatic Rado watch. Below the rotating anchor, you guys can see the brand signature done in almost a silver tone dimensional printing. I think that looks sharp on this reflective fume dial. Below that is your Dauphine style handset, beveled, high polished, and if you look at your minute hand and you're running seconds hand, you guys will see the traditional bent tip that mimics the form of the dome of the dial underneath. That's a nice feature. And then below the hand stack, you guys will see the twin seahorses done in gold tones, so adding a little bit of color play here in addition to the red and the blue of the fume. Below the twin seahorses, you guys will see the retro Goldenhorse font, which looks really good. I love these retro reissues when it comes to the naming. Goldenhorse for this one, Captain Cook with the diver I owned last year. They're very simple, very strong. You don't see any water resistance designation or automatic designation. That is done with the rotating anchor, for those of you now in the know. And you won't see any silly superlative chronometer certification or anything like that. There's no unnecessary text on the dial. You see the brand name, the model name, and the Swiss-made designation on either side of the 6 o'clock applique. If we go over to the date wheel, we have a framed date wheel in the curve of the dial. The font is done in a red print, which ties in with the background of the rotating logo. And it's not printed on white. You guys can see there's a very subtle silver color to the date disc, and I like to see that. So I look at the dial. The dial really is the star of the show in terms of how dynamic it is, how simple it is, and that speaks to the original design from 1957. If it was a nice execution in the late 1950s, that should carry over to 2020. The strengths don't change, and I think that's pretty apparent here on the Goldenhorse 1957. So let's talk about the movement. Inside the case is the ETA C07 movement, which is modified from a 2824. Now the modifications include a free sprung balance, a 21,600 beat per hour rate, and an 80-hour power reserve, which is more than double the 38 hours of an unmodified 2824. This one is running within chronometer levels of accuracy. It is not certified by the COSC, but is very well dialed in. You wind it via the crown at the 3 o'clock position. This is a push-pull crown, not a screw-down crown, and the watch does carry 50 meters of water resistance. Now let's talk about those negative elements. What would be those? I would say one comes down to the lack of indexing on the dial, and that is only present when you're setting the time and the minute hand is not on a multiple of 5. If you're not at the hour marker, then you have to kind of guesstimate to a degree which index you're setting the position to. So I like the simplistic look. I think that's strong, but when you're setting the time, you'll kind of want to wait for an hour marker just to get it precise if you have a little bit of OCD like I do. Now the other negative element is a bit more subjective, and that will come to the water resistance, 50 meters and a push-pull crown. Now obviously this is not a dive watch, so I don't want to get too unrealistic in my expectations, but as a watch fan, I would enjoy a screw-down crown and I would enjoy 100 meters of water resistance just for the peace of mind if, you know what, I decide to jump in the pool that day and I know I've got a complete waterproof watch on wrist. Something like that. I think that could be an improvement here. So let's take a look at this. We have a nice design here. It's very vintage in its design language, but it's modern in its execution. So we have linear striations, micro striations running north to south on this clasp. You guys can see the Goldenhorse logo here on the clasp, so it's nice to see it on the dial. It's nice to see it back on the clasp. There's a twin push button release and a milled center folding portion, polished. But if we look at the sidewall, you guys will notice there are no micro adjustment holes. There's just one position at the end of the clasp. So as you're sizing the watch, you've got to get the right fit in adjusting the grains of rice or taking out links of the bracelet alone, because you won't have the micro adjust. Now that is a negative element. That is a drawback. But here's why it's subjective. What Rado is doing is they're going for a seamless integration between the bracelet, between the grains of rice, and this vintage-inspired milled clasp. So the clasp doesn't bump out wider than the width of the bracelet, and that lends to comfort. If you look at the side profile, you guys can see it's just about the same in overall height. So as you're wearing this watch, the clasp really disappears, and it's comfortable. It's more comfortable than a larger, wider clasp that carries micro adjustment holes, if that makes sense. So there is some give and take, and that's why I say it's subjective. Now let's wrap up this video presentation, and I'll show you the other color iterations that Rado offers. So there's a green fume, which looks really good. There's the blue fume that we've talked about today here on the channel. And then there's a red fume that comes not on the grains of rice, but on a leather strap. Now lastly, there is a black dial version, and it's a little bit different. Instead of a fume application, there is a very well-defined guilloche concentric circle texture, which I think looks pretty sharp. So those are the versions. They retail at about $1,800 depending on the color iteration and the bracelet version that you get. And this has been one of Rado's best-selling models over the past couple months on their website. And it's not hard to see why. I like the size, I like the details, I like the retro design language, the bracelet. I think the simplicity in the design is very strong. It's not for everyone, but it's a fun piece. So a big thank you to Rado for sending this in and gifting me a little bit of swag. I've got a new wallet now, I've got a pen. And so, I mean, that's really kind. They've been great to work with. They even sent me a little thank you note, which is just, it's just a classy move. It's old school manners that I appreciate. So guys, thanks for watching today. Reach out with any questions you may have. If I didn't convey a particular point very clearly, I'd be happy to elaborate. I hope you guys have a great day. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.